Airliners today can fly higher than most people can even imagine. At cruising altitude, you're already above most clouds, storms, and commercial air traffic. So that raises a question. If higher altitude means thinner air and better fuel efficiency, why don't airplanes fly at 50,000 feet or even higher? The answer is more complicated than most people think. Because at extreme altitudes, airplanes begin approaching the limits of physics itself. Modern commercial aircraft usually cruise between 35,000 and 40,000 feet. That altitude is considered the sweet spot for airliners, high enough to reduce drag and save fuel, but still low enough for the engines and wings to work properly. And that balance is incredibly important, because airplanes don't fly like rockets. They rely on the surrounding air for almost everything. Jet engines need oxygen from the atmosphere to create thrust. Wings need dense enough air to generate lift, and pilots need enough performance margin to safely control the aircraft. The higher you climb, the more difficult all of that becomes. At first, climbing higher actually helps airplanes. The air becomes thinner, which creates less drag. Less drag means the aircraft burns less fuel. That's one of the reasons airlines fly so high in the first place. A commercial jet at cruising altitude is far more fuel efficient than one flying much lower. But eventually, thinner air stops being an advantage, because while drag decreases, lift decreases too. Wings generate lift by moving through air. When the air becomes too thin, the wings produce less lift, even at high speeds. That means the aircraft has to fly faster and faster just to stay airborne. And at the same time, the engines also begin losing performance. Jet engines depend on compressed air mixed with fuel. At very high altitudes, there simply isn't enough oxygen available, so the engines produce less thrust. Eventually, the airplane reaches a dangerous point known as the coffin corner. This is one of the most extreme flight conditions an aircraft can experience. At coffin corner, the aircraft is trapped between two dangerous speeds. Fly slightly too slow, and the plane can stall because the wings lose lift. Fly slightly too fast, and the aircraft risks structural problems caused by high-speed airflow. At very high altitudes, those two limits get closer and closer together, leaving pilots with only a very small, safe operating window. In other words, the airplane runs out of room to safely fly. Weather is another reason airplanes don't climb endlessly. While flying above storms sounds ideal, most dangerous weather systems can already be avoided at normal cruising altitude. Climbing much higher usually provides little extra benefit. And there's another major problem: cabin pressure. At 40,000 feet, the outside air pressure is already extremely low. Humans cannot survive there without pressurization. Airliners constantly pump compressed air into the cabin to keep passengers safe and comfortable. But the higher the aircraft flies, the harder the cabin systems must work. That creates enormous stress on the aircraft's fuselage over time. Engineers must carefully balance performance, efficiency, safety, and structural limits, which is why commercial airplanes stay within a carefully designed altitude range. Some aircraft can fly much higher than normal airliners. Military reconnaissance aircraft like the U-2 were designed for extremely high altitudes, and the Concorde regularly cruised above 50,000 feet. But these aircraft were built for very specific purposes. Concorde burned enormous amounts of fuel, and high-altitude spy planes sacrificed comfort, passenger capacity, and efficiency. For normal commercial travel, those trade-offs simply aren't practical. Airlines care about efficiency more than maximum altitude. Flying slightly higher is pointless if it dramatically increases cost or reduces safety margins. So in the end, airplanes don't fly higher than 40,000 feet for one simple reason. Above that altitude, the sky becomes less and less friendly to flight itself. The air gets too thin. The engines lose power. The wings lose lift. And the margin for error becomes dangerously small. That's why modern airliners stay in the narrow altitude zone where flying is most efficient, stable, and safe. High enough to cross entire oceans efficiently, but not high enough to fight the limits of physics.